All right, everybody. If you want to bring it back in. It always cracks me up to watch the dynamics of the room. It seems like the earlier the people came in, they kind of sit in the front. I don't know, they're like business-minded. They sit down, they're ready to rock. The people in the back are still talking, man. They're just like, woo! So good to hang out. So we've been having a good time with this series. I've got your back. We've got Stan the man there working the door today as our usher. I hope you've been enjoying it. You know, this series was kind of a fun one for me because I was hoping to get a new opportunity. So you might understand the way we organize our services are through series. We like to take our messages and group them together in series. And then each series, just to kind of organize it, we give it some artwork. And Trevor is our resident artist. And so we've had some series over the years. You know, like we did this one, you might remember, assembling the pieces of our lives. Trevor made our own custom Lego man. This is not prefab, okay? He made all of this. Little dots actually said stuff about Beacon on them. They didn't even say Lego. Okay, so I'm like, that's cool. You know, guys, I'm an artist too. They're like, yeah, that's fine. Then we did The Walking Dead. And Trevor made this apocalyptic scene. There's Jesus, you know, with the stripes on his back, the hole in his hand, the lens flare coming through the palm onto the tunic. You know, this is the kind of art that we get. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. You know, guys, I'm an artist too. They're like, yeah, that's nice. So then we do Angry Birds. And, you know, Angry Birds looks gorgeous. You know, we made it a snow theme. You know, nobody else can really do this except for Trevor. And I'm like, all right, I'm an artist too. And they're like, yeah. So then we do Seriously, which, you know, we have this beautiful, this is my house. It's not my house, but this is a nice house. You know, the guy's, that's not Andrew either, by the way. But there's a guy sweeping stuff under the rug. And I'm like, guys, I'm an artist too. So finally, I got to draw this series. So how did I do? Tell me, honestly. How does it compare, right? Woo! I mean, that's some high quality work, I gotta tell you. Unfortunately, especially because today's topic is lying, I have to be honest with you, they didn't let me draw this one either. But I totally could have, okay? I even have, I practiced, I was all ready to go, but it didn't happen. But anyway, we're having such a good time with this series. We're in the midst of our conspiracy of kindness. How's that been going for you? Yeah, by the way, I just have a handout. Maybe if you guys could make sure. Do you mind working one half? Do you mind? Just give one to everyone, collect $1 in return for them. That's your commission for having, who wants to work on this side? Nick wants to make some cash today. So we've had a lot of time. This past week in our conspiracy, we talked about showing kindness to the church family. Right, so we had an opportunity, you know, our charge was to take 7 opportunities to really reach out to the church family, show them that we love them, maybe with a handwritten note or a text or a comment. And I'll be honest, I did not get my 7 in. I felt terrible, actually, because when we were talking about it, I thought, this one's going to be so fun. Because you just go to the people that you know and love, and you just tell them that you know and love them. Like, this is going to be great. And then, I didn't get my 7 done. So right now, I'm going to cover 165 all at once. You guys are awesome and smart and funny and good looking. Okay? All right, done. So I need 10 marbles. So this week gets even harder. This week, in the conspiracy of kindness, our focus turns to the righting of wrongs. Ouch. It turns to maybe there's an apology from you that's overdue that you need to extend to someone. Maybe you just need to talk about it in person. Maybe you need to send a letter. You know, maybe there's someone that you need to forgive that you might not be in communication anymore, but you know in your heart you need to forgive them. Or maybe someone has asked you for your forgiveness and you've not been able to grant it. That's a big part of kindness too, is being able to kind of finish that cycle, not just kindness in nicety, but kindness in our overall conduct and love that we have for each other. So that's a really hard one. So I tell you what, Robert's been laying out 7 a week. I'm going to lower it from 7. Because I'm hoping that you don't have 7 people that you owe an apology to today. Although we are New Yorkers, so we might. All right, so I tell you what, let's just amend this a little bit. Let's take some time each day of our 7 days to really reflect on this. You know, who's left in your life that really needs to hear from you, that really needs an apology? And then kind of act on that. And if you take some time for reflection on this every day, you can marble it up on Sunday. Deal? All right, let's do that. All right, so we're turning to today's topic, which is honesty. So when we started talking about a series based on virtue, we knew right away that we have to talk about truth. We have to talk about honesty, because that's a big part of being a person of character, is being someone who doesn't lie. Now, you would think we've all been told this for as long as we've been able to speak, right? You have to tell the truth. But it doesn't seem like we've got it down quite yet, especially as a society. You know, if you read the New York Times, you'll quickly see so much news about lying or cheating. You know, academic scandals right now are at an all-time high. There's all kinds of cheating going on in schools. I read a story this week about a student who had a great idea. They took the label off their water bottle. They wrote some notes on the back, a crib sheet, I think it's called. I've never had such a thing. You write it on the back. Then they put it back on the water bottle, thinking, this is going to be great. No one is going to know this is here. Because, of course, you're allowed to bring water into a test. I mean, what kind of animal wouldn't allow their students to drink water during a test? So the student took their water bottle and just had it on their desk. But, of course, as all of you know who already passed this class, the water is going to magnify the notes on the inside of the label to make sure that the teacher can read it from wherever they are. So the student got totally busted because they had written the notes on the inside of a water bottle. There was a huge scandal in Atlanta. You might have heard about this, about, standardized tests, about cheating, about, there was accusations that the cheating was by the school officials on behalf of the students to try to make things right. I was reading up about this. The superintendent, her name was Beverly Hall, and she actually passed away recently from cancer. And the article in the Atlanta paper actually said, essentially, it's too bad that she died, so she never has to face up to the music for what happened. Like, really? She died. I think that's a little bit worse than, losing your job because of this scandal. The poor woman is dead. But that's the kind of angst that we have about this issue. ABC News did a confidential survey. 74% of high school students admitted to cheating on a test within the past year. Newsweek magazine said, cheating is so prevalent in U.S. schools and colleges that the cheater seems to almost be the normal college student. They call it the good neighbor policy or the wandering eye. Now, it's not just our country. Read a story recently, Robert sent it to me. There's a tradition in India, apparently, that in 10th grade, you have to take a test. You have to pass this test in order to continue your education. So it's a big deal for you personally and for your family. So check out this picture. I don't know if you can kind of make it out. This is outside the school. These are parents climbing the walls of the school to help their kids with the test. Okay? Some of these people at the bottom are police waiting to arrest them. And it doesn't matter. The cheating scandal is rampant. But cheating doesn't seem to end after school. I wish we could just talk about this in Fusion with the youth group, kind of straighten it out, and then as adults we'd be fine. But it seems to really perpetuate throughout life. Recently, Gallup did a survey. They took 25 popular professions and asked people very simply, what is your opinion of the honesty and ethical standards of these professions? Before we show it to you, does anyone want to guess what the most honorable profession is in terms of ethics and honesty and ethical standards? Anyone want to guess? What's that? Military did okay, but they weren't number one. It's not pastors, believe me. Somebody said it. Not lawyers. Nurses. Nurses were number one, right? Congratulations. They actually win every year. I don't know if they're the ones that they ask or something, but the nurses win every year. All right, so here's the top 5, okay? Top 5 honorable professions. Nurses, 80%. Pharmacists, 70%, and down the line you go. Grade school teachers, doctors, police officers. Those are the top 5. Now, here's what's really sad. Those are also the only professions that broke 50% at all. So, I don't know how they do grades now because I'm not a Common Core student. But when I was in school, only 3 of those people would have passed, and 2 of them barely. Right? 69%, the teacher probably lets you walk, and that's it. It's terrible. So I know you want to know the bottom 5, right? Bottom 5, advertisers, state office holders, because they had to separate politicians, car salespeople, then congressmen, and their friend, the lobbyists. These are the bottom 5. So, by the way, your congressmen people, 8% of them think congressmen are honest and ethical. Very interesting. So there's a whole bunch in the middle. I can tell you, clergy came in at 47%. So most people believe clergy are lying just a little bit more often than not, which means all of this today could be total garbage. So just take that into consideration. Okay, that's my disclaimer. But let's look to God's word to see his truth in this. Let's look to Ephesians chapter 4. And Ephesians is an interesting book by Paul. Some of the books that Paul wrote were very specific. He would write to a kind of a specific place about a certain issue that he really wanted to address that felt very important. And of course, all these letters are memorialized for us to learn from. Ephesians is one of the most kind of generic letters, really designed to circulate. So it's really to all people. So the whole Bible, of course, applies to our everyday life. Ephesians especially so, because the idea here is that this letter applies to everyone. And as you work through the chapters, some themes sort of emerge. It starts with a general conversation about God's will, then about the role of the church, then about the gospel, the actual, that Jesus died for people's sins. Then it has a long closing section about ethical living. And it's kind of this same tension that we've been talking about, that it seems like when you grow older, we would have these things down that we've been told since we were younger, but it doesn't seem to correlate. That even though we start to live understanding who God is, it doesn't always change our behaviors. One of the things as a church we've been talking about, our nickname for it is Chapter 2, is we want to be people who have not just been introduced to Christ. We want to be people who have not simply become Christians, but we want to be people who are forever growing in our faith, forever becoming that version of ourselves that God has created us to be. And then, of course, as part of Chapter 2, we always want to talk about how we can bring others with us kind of personally and collectively on this journey. And that's what's so interesting about Ephesians and about this series, because we're talking about, in some ways it's advanced Christian living, and in other ways it's you cannot tell a lie, which we've been told since we were absolutely little kids. So Ephesians 4 is really into this ethical section. So the first verse says, as a prisoner for the Lord then, that's Paul talking about, he's a prisoner, you're not the prisoner, he's the prisoner. I urge you then to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. It's just a general introductory statement to say, you've been called Christians. It's time to live the life that's worthy of that calling, of that name, of that label, if you will, in a good way. You've taken on the name of Christ, you're a Christian now. Let's really live in such a way that's honorable and well done. Then look at verse 14 to 15. We're going to skip around a little bit. Paul says, then we will no longer be infants tossed back and forth by the waves, blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of people and their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. Then skip down to verse 25. Therefore, each of you must put off all falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body. He quotes, in your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you're angry. Do not give the devil a foothold. So Paul very quickly here is talking about some of the growth that we see, these growth opportunities that sit in front of us when we dedicate ourselves towards living God's way, specifically towards being people of truth, people of honesty. And I think very quickly he draws two areas. He says, you're going to find growth within. The person that you are, the person that you're becoming. He kind of draws this image of being a baby in the ocean. You no longer be an infant tossed by the waves and blown by the wind. He's talking about a personal security, a groundedness, a strength that we have, that we really grow in as we learn to live God's way. And I don't know about you, but I felt that way sometimes when I'm sort of wandering. I'm not really sure, very insecure. Paul is saying this type of growth is when you feel rooted, when you feel grounded. But then he instantly talks about the growth around you, the growth, we'll call it within and without. He talks about the impact on the community, how it will actually revolutionize your spiritual family, your church, and then therefore by extension, the actual communities, the neighborhoods in which we live. So, if you go to the handout, we'll start to develop some of this stuff in a way that I hope you can take home and just kind of think about. So if you look at the growth that happens within, the first thing I would submit to you is this. To lie is to create your own suffering. Create your own suffering. Have you ever experienced that? You said something that wasn't true, or you were a part of something that wasn't true or wasn't honest, and it leads to such tension in your soul. Because now there's kind of this disconnect, there's a sort of incongruity between what you've said and what's actually true. And there's this tension that comes up. I spoke to a man a while back. He physically was pretty able, but he still lived on disability. And he didn't want to work because it would affect his disability. And it really caused a lot of internal struggle. He wasn't sure, am I well? Am I sick? Am I on disability? Am I not? This is that moment when You want to get off work and you think, well, I'll just call in sick. But you know that you're not sick. And then if you call in sick, but then you go out on the boat, then you can't post a picture on Facebook that you were on the boat because and all of a sudden there's this terrible tension that emerges, right? Because you're not congruent with your life. What you said isn't real. And that can really be a struggle from people. I was reading a book this week, and it was interesting. It wasn't a Christian book at all. In fact, it was kind of the anti-Christian message in many ways. So I don't want to tell you the name, because if you're only half listening, you're going to go home and read it, and then you're going to say, Chris told me to read this book. But, all right, but the author was saying that the internal struggle of the lies that we told causes most of the stress in our lives. That was his core conviction. That when we've told lies, when we're hiding things, when we're sort of, shading the truth, it's very stressful. We create our own suffering. And to lie like that, it wears us out. It totally wears us down. We don't just lie to others at that point, we even begin to lie to ourselves. I read something recently, I've told some of you about this, but I found it very interesting. I like to run and do races and that sort of thing, triathlons and all that, so I read a lot of that kind of stuff. So I read this study once, and the title was, I'm training all the time, why am I not losing any weight? I thought, well, that's interesting. I've known a lot of people with that question. So they did a study of people who had worked out and people who hadn't. And they found that this theory emerged that they called the license theory. The license theory was essentially that when people had worked out in the morning, that for the rest of the day, they sort of convinced themselves, I can eat whatever I want. I worked out. Which you're laughing because you know it is not true. But it's so easy to convince yourself, and that's just a small lie. I worked out this morning, I can eat whatever I want. But it's not true. So you start to build these lies even in the way you manage yourself and your time and your soul. For me, one of the struggles, one of the lies I tell myself is, I don't need a lot of sleep. So I stay up late doing stuff, I get up early doing stuff, I do it all the time. It's a lie. Once I go long enough like that, I'm just the meanest possible version of myself. That's the truth. But, I tell myself that lie, I don't need a lot of sleep. Really? Everyone you know disagrees with that statement. All right, okay, cool. You can create this kind of sense of internal suffering. The opposite of that is this realization. It's on your handout. It is truth that brings about real life change. Change in your own life, change in your relationships. If you really acknowledge what's happening in your life, good or bad, that leads to true life change. Some of us, we're going through struggles and we don't want to admit it. That's a lie that we're telling ourselves. Others of us, things are actually pretty great in life, but we're focusing on a couple of small things that are going terribly, and we can eventually convince ourselves that life is awful. It's also a lie. You need kind of an objectivity about your own life, and then when you realize that truth can bring about real life change. I find it interesting, Jesus actually refers to himself as the way, the truth, and the life. John 14. It says, no one can come to the Father except through me, who is the truth. And the truth will set you free. So we have to acknowledge the real truth and what it is. And so that's why the Bible is just full of these instructions. Colossians is a book very closely related to Ephesians, and it just says it so succinctly. Do not lie to each other. You've taken off your old self with its practices. You've put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge in the image of its creator. And this lying, it stands between us, truly, between us and the life that we're pursuing in Christ. All right, so let's talk about it. It's on the handout. What are some things that honesty really is not? I had a lot of fun working on this section because I think these are the easy outs. When you think, all right, I can be more honest, here's what I'm going to do. And these are some of the strategies we do. Number one, honesty is not keeping it real. You know that guy? I'm just keeping it real, man. I don't know if you saw Jerry Maguire, but it was the brother. His name was Teepee. He was the brother of Rod Tidwell. I'm old. I saw Jerry Maguire, okay? The brother, that's all he says. I'm just keeping it real. I'm just keeping it real. By the end of the movie, they would punch him in his head every time he said, I'm just keeping it real. We don't want to use truth as our excuse for just ongoing confrontationalism. The truth without context can be a weapon. So there's a lot of times when we need grace. And so you don't want to just decide, well, this is my truth strategy. I'm just going to keep it real. Honesty is not taking a pass. It's the opposite of keeping it real. Sometimes you're aware of a truth, and it could change a person's life. and you think, I'm gonna keep it to myself. For whatever reason. Sometimes we're worried about the confrontation. Sometimes we're concerned that if we give them a little bit of truth, even more truth is gonna come back. That can be scary. Sometimes it's not any sort of malicious intent, it's just kind of a lack of engagement. You think, well, I'm gonna take a pass. You know what? They'll figure it out on their own. And we could talk a whole Sunday about this, and we have before. The need to give each other real and honest feedback. The Bible draws a picture of iron sharpening iron. We need to be able to give each other the real truth, because if your friend has a need for truth in their life and you don't give it to them, they're eventually going to find it. And the person down the line who's finally willing to give them the feedback may not have the grace or the courage or the conviction or the kindness that you do. And I would encourage you to take that opportunity. Henry Ward Beecher, he said, "It is one of the severest tests of friendship to tell your friend his faults. If you're angry with a man or hate him, it's not hard to go and stab him with words. But so to love a man that you cannot bear to see the stain of sin upon him, and to speak painful truth through loving words, that is friendship. But few have such friends. Our enemies usually teach us what we are, at the point of the sword." So we don't want to withhold that truth from people that we know and love. It's critical to who they are. Honesty is not being an open book. Now hear me out on this. Do you think, wait. Here, what I'm really talking about here, and you may not know any of these people, I'm talking about kind of the serial confessors. Okay, whenever you're around them, they just have all kinds of stuff to confess. And they're just getting it all out on the table. And you know what? If that's your best friend and you met over coffee and you're reflecting life on life, that's awesome. And I commend you for that. But that's not usually what it is, right? Sometimes you get around people, not everyone struggles with this, but some people, they just spew the truth all over everybody. That's not really honesty either, because usually you'll find that in that there's more of a manipulation motive, or there might be just a power motive, or maybe they're seeking sympathy, and you can always find some good in it. But just be careful, because honesty is not just simply an open book. That's more like therapy, which has its context, but it's something to be careful of. Honesty is not flying under the radar. This is a huge one. Because you think, well, am I really lying if I don't get caught? I mean, how many tax returns can they really audit? Seriously. There's so many of us. By the way, they make you submit it online for a reason. I don't even think they have to read it anymore, okay? Think, if I don't get caught, I mean, how much air do I have to let out of the football before they're really gonna catch me, right? I saw this great meme. I almost brought it today, but I didn't. It was a bouncy castle at a birthday party, and it was half deflated. And it said, "Tom Brady throws a party for the neighborhood." And I'm like, I like that. Because you're trying to avoid detection. That's not what honesty is. Being smart enough to not get caught usually means they're adding a second sin on top of the first dishonesty. That's not what honesty is. I know that you're very smart and you can figure out how to not get caught. But let's take it to the next level. Let's be truly honest. Let's live those lives that are really integrated. I read a story this year. I found it fascinating. There was a coach. His name was Steve Masiello. He was a coach nearby here at Manhattan, I believe. And his team did great, basketball coach in the NCAA tournament. They did great. So he got national attention, this coach. He got hired to a bigger, better university. They found out later his resume wasn't honest. For 15 years, he had stuff on his resume that wasn't true. He claimed it was a miscommunication, maybe, but he had stuff on his resume that wasn't true, and he got fired from the best opportunity of his entire life. And it wasn't even an opportunity that he got from the resume. It's not even like he leveraged this lie, and he just got caught, because for all these years it had never been detected. That's not honesty. And related to this, the last one, I want to say honesty is not technically true. I'll put quotes around technically when you write it. It's not technically true. In fact, if you're talking to people and you or they have to say, well, technically, the next thing that you're going to say is probably not true. Or it's just a little bit true, but it's not true enough to pass the smell test. Like you wouldn't say that to Jesus if he was standing there, because you would know. And so often that's part of flying under the radar, the ability to tell the story in a perfect way to make sure, well, I didn't say anything that's not true. But however, the conclusions that we let people draw, well, they're definitely not true. So what is honesty? Think of it this way. Honesty is the full, real story to the appropriate audience. It's the full, real story to the appropriate audience. And I know we've built a much longer amount of time kind of for a case of what honesty is not. But if you've stripped away all of those things, this is what remains. The full, real story to the appropriate audience. So quickly, I just want to give you 3 values of honesty. And I think these are kind of intrinsic, but just so you can kind of think about them in a unified way. The first one is, truth confronts hypocrisy. It's hard to spell. It's on the screen. The truth confronts hypocrisy. This is the biggest accusation against the church today, right? The church is full of hypocrites. Well, that's probably true because the world is actually full of hypocrites, and people are people. And so the truth confronts this. If we can be honest about who we are, if we can be honest about our lives and what's really happening, then we can confront this hypocrisy and we can grow in it. Number 2, truth is necessary for real healing. This is a recap of what we were talking about earlier. If you can't acknowledge what's really happening in your life, with you, with others, with relationships, with personal issues, you can't heal. You can't grow. You're actually going to keep picking at the scab every time you add more sin and more deceit on top of whatever's happening. But if you want to really grow, if you want to become that person that God has created you to be, it requires truth. And with that, truth is required for real love. If you don't have that honest, open communication with the people that you love, if they don't have honest, open communication with you, then it's not real love. It's actually pretend. Because if someone's being untruthful, then you're loving a person that's not real, or they're loving a person that's not real. Now with this, of course, and it's not our topic today, but I think it's obvious, we also have to be people who can receive truth. Right? We have to be people of grace, people of charity. You know, if somebody comes to you, not the serial confessors, but real confession this week, you know, someone may come to you with their conspiracy of kindness apology. We need to be someone who can receive that truth. You know, we need to be a safe place. You know, a lot of people are looking for a safe place, but if you learn to be a safe place for others, you will quickly surround yourself with those kinds of relationships. So this week, as you think about this, many of you will be in growth groups. We're going to talk about it even more. We're going to talk about how you can be honest in prayer, how you can be honest in your journaling. You can be honest with your close friends. We'll talk about this strategy of learning how to receive truth, because this is not something that we just sort of take in and, oh, okay, I can do that. Because if that was the case, you would have conquered this when you were 5 years old. But instead, you know, we live in community. Imagine what our church could be like. Imagine what our community of faith would be. Imagine what the communities that we live in would be. If we were people of truth, if we were people of that kind of compassion to say, I'm always going to be honest with you, I'm always going to give you that real feedback, and I'm always going to receive the truth from you in that way. So would you pray with me this morning? God, thank you for your word. Thank you that it challenges us, that it teaches us to be people of truth. Thank you that Jesus, the way, the truth, and the life came for us. And I pray that all of us would learn every day to live a life that's worthy of that calling. Thank you for your forgiveness, God. In a message like this, I know me personally and probably many of my friends, we're reminded of the times that we've stepped in this hole. We're reminded of the lies that we've told, the lies that we've perpetuated, the lies that we've allowed to exist. Thank you for your forgiveness in this. Thank you that you are the ultimate receiver of truth, and that we come to you asking for your grace and your forgiveness, knowing that you grant it readily. So God, allow us to grow in this every day, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.